During the whole week that Amy was away from home, my mind was consumed by a whirlwind of questions. Should I have the courage to talk to her? Should I change the lock? Is divorce the only way out? The thought of having to give up 4 years of marriage wasn't easy for me, but I didn't want to put up with her cheating anymore. We put so much effort into rebuilding our relationship after the first incident. It was very frustrating to see everything crumble again, especially after she promised it wouldn't happen again. It was painful. The first betrayal disrupted our plans to start a family because we spent months restoring trust. The irony was that Amy actually confessed her infidelity to me. I didn't have any suspicions, and I would never have thought of it, but her honesty, though painful at the time, helped us through this difficult period. I clearly remember this moment. We were in the car coming back from her mother's, and Amy was unusually quiet throughout dinner. While we were sitting, the atmosphere was more subdued than usual. Her mother's chatter filled in all possible gaps in the conversation, so I didn't have the slightest suspicion that something was wrong. Feeling the tension inside her, I gently calmed her down. "Honey, you know I love you, right?" She replied, confirming her understanding. But then she took a deep breath and admitted that she needed to share something that was bothering her. I saw her inner struggle as she plucked up the courage to continue. "I had an affair," she confessed, her voice filled with remorse. "It's over now. It didn't last long. I am so sorry. I'd like to take it all back." My immediate reaction was to ask about the details. With whom? Why? And where did this happen? In her vulnerable state, she poured out a flood of information, and although it hurt me to hear it, it allowed me to give a cathartic outlet to emotions. Her friend Jesse's fiancé was unfaithful to her, and she agreed to meet him for a drink, claiming that it was necessary to gather evidence to expose his actions in front of Jesse. At least, that's what she told me, and I wanted to believe her. She said she tried to talk him out of it and convince him that Jesse is the one he should really want. But a few weeks later, while I was on a business trip, she attended a party at Jesse's and, succumbing to alcohol, succumbed to temptation and entered into a quick relationship with him in his bed. Unfortunately, it happened twice more in their homes before guilt consumed her, and she swore she was done with it. 2 months later, we attended the wedding of Jesse and her fiancé. A month later, Jesse and her fiancé moved to Chicago. I understand how the situation developed, as it often happens in such circumstances. Courtship of a charming man in combination with the inattention of a spouse due to long work and frequent moves, and even under the influence of alcohol, can lead to undesirable consequences. But most of all, I was worried about the subsequent meetings and the fact that he was engaged to Jesse. This deeply saddened me as it revealed a significant flaw in my character, to betray my close friend in such a way. How could she witness Jesse walking down the aisle in a bridesmaid's dress, ostensibly celebrating a friend's wedding, knowing that she had an affair with the groom? The dissonance between her actions and the role she played in this event seemed incomprehensible. In the days that followed, our relationship deteriorated even further. I no longer felt at ease in our house, and the thought of physical intimacy with her repelled me. Every time I tried to touch her, it just reminded me of how we slept together at the time when she was having a secret affair with her friend's future husband. The thought that she hid it from me and I turned out to be unwittingly gullible and stupid haunted me. I remembered with horror how I congratulated him at the wedding, how I shared with him my incorrect comments about the reality of marriage. After 2 weeks of scant communication, Amy turned to me with a request to attend consultations together. She expressed her fear, a sincere fear that I might leave her. Amy approached the consultations with deep fear, the fear that her actions had caused irreparable damage to our relationship and that forgiveness would be impossible. The classes themselves turned out to be emotionally difficult. They got to the bottom of our problems, but over time, after a few months had passed, I was able to pull away from the pain enough to see that our relationship was starting to develop again. A lot has been revealed during this process. Amy admitted that because of my frequent trips, she felt distrustful of our marriage. I acknowledged my passivity in the relationship, often avoiding discussing our problems, which in turn caused her to feel inferior. It was peculiar how the actions of one person could easily be attributed to the shortcomings of another. Nevertheless, in the process of consulting, I gained a new perspective and understanding. In the process of counseling, the blame was shifted from one to the other until it fell on the shoulders of both. It took several months of struggling with anger and denial before a balance was reached. Gradually, we found the golden mean and began to rediscover happiness in our relationship. The aspect of therapy that resonated deeply with me is the commitments we made regarding honesty, building trust, loyalty, and open communication. I wholeheartedly accepted these rules and made a conscious effort to implement them into our daily lives. I adjusted my travel schedule so that Amy could join me at the end of the week, which allowed us to spend extra time together. We even started doing sports together, cherishing the opportunity to share these moments and deepen our bond. Our relationship has changed a lot, affecting even the simplest moments of our lives. When work required me to take long breaks, we would definitely meet for dinner in order to maintain our relationship. Now, these moments have been erased from our lives. The disclosure of her infidelity happened unexpectedly. It was early in the morning, and I ran into technical problems while trying to send the file by email. Faced with a dilemma, I realized that I could use Amy's laptop by connecting to her work network and transfer the file through her professional mailbox. While navigating through her email interface, a preview window accidentally caught my attention. At that moment, while moving the mouse and looking at the screen, I came across the words, "You're so incredibly attractive." The sender turned out to be one of the other lawyers of the firm. While my heart was pounding with anxiety and hope, I decided that this could be harmless flirtation or maybe even a game between them. The summary of the rest of the letter left a lot unsaid but hinted at the possibility of a deeper connection. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that it could just be friendship. I urged myself not to lose my composure and not to let emotions take over. In search of confirmation, I started looking for the sender's name in Amy's mailbox. But my hopes were quickly dashed when I found out that she had saved a lot of letters from this person and sent the same amount in response. Trying to clarify the situation, I randomly selected one of the letters from him, and what I read left me in deep perplexity. His words radiated adoration. He described the time spent together as the most incredible moment in his life and called her a goddess. The situation was far from the best, and my fears increased significantly. Curious and growing angry, I chose another letter, this time from Amy. It informed about plans for a date, and it was clearly stated that I would be out of town, and she had to get home by 10 o'clock for him to call. The following letter from him intensified my disappointment. "You're a bad girl, and I like that." Overwhelmed with anger, I felt an impulse to immediately engage in a fight with her and even thought about physical violence. But I overcame this desire and sat down at the keyboard, considering the decision whether to read all the letters or not. I needed time to process this shocking revelation. It occurred to me to forward all his letters to my address, but such an approach would leave traces. Instead, I painstakingly copied each letter onto a portable data storage device, carefully storing the evidence for later reflection and consideration. Unable to find peace in our shared bed, I tried to relax on the couch, but a feeling of displacement overwhelmed me. It seemed that my loving but unfaithful wife had deprived me of my rightful place in our house. In the end, I leaned on the kitchen table, aimlessly flipping through magazines, and the night dragged on. At dawn, I hurried into the shower, waking Amy up to inform her of an urgent work need that required my immediate attention. It was just an excuse to escape. Arriving at my office long before the others arrived, I sat down at my desk and carefully printed out all the emails exchanged between my wife and this other man, Rob. The printed emails revealed a fascinating story of a passionate and long-lasting romance between Amy and Rob. It became clear that their illicit relationship had begun 3 months earlier and showed no signs of abating. Amy showed an unwavering commitment to maintaining their connection, and their meetings took place with unwavering regularity. To make matters worse, Rob had a camera that allowed him to capture the moments of their life together. He often sent Amy photos in which she was depicted in compromising situations, and others showed their faces. From Monday to Friday, they met at a hotel in Phoenix and began a frank conversation about spending the night together. They chose their time carefully as Amy couldn't afford to miss a meeting with me. These calls served as a confirmation of our commitments based on loyalty, openness, and honesty. But it seems that for some people, commitments were just a ceremonial act. Despite my doubts, I decided not to come into conflict with Amy during her absence. I wanted to sort out my emotions and desires. The previous incident, which she promised would be the last, took me by surprise. Not knowing how it would end, I knew perfectly well that a collision at such a moment would most likely throw me off balance for a long time. Looking at my computer's calendar, I noticed that today is Wednesday, so I have already experienced anger and despair. It was time to make a decision. What do I really want? The answer surfaced from the depths of my consciousness: revenge. I wanted revenge. She deceived me by promising to be faithful, but in the end, betrayed me. I trusted her, and now she's broken my heart to pieces. I devoted 2 more years of my life to her only because I believed the promises she made during our consultations. 2 years were irretrievably lost. I was thinking about getting a divorce, but for what purpose? Perhaps she stayed with me only out of guilt or some kind of flawed love. Perhaps she felt obligated to keep our commitments. If we had separated, she would still have received half of our modest possessions. She would have continued to work as a lawyer and remained attractive to another man. I wanted to destroy her, to shatter her hopes and dreams. In a fit of anger, I came up with the idea of hiring someone to harm her. When I was considering various scenarios of cruelty, it dawned on me that the implementation of any of them would lead me to turn into a monstrous figure facing a minimum term of 35 years to life without parole. So, I was looking for an alternative way. My nightly meetings and calls with her passed unhindered. I honed my acting skills by skillfully pretending to be happy. In fact, I was determined to succeed in this role. I planned to manipulate her, exposing her to a crushing fall. Now, it was necessary to develop a carefully thought-out plan that would not leave any suspicion. They say that God lives in the details, but so does the devil. It was not easy to come up with a convincing plan and at the same time ensure its flawless implementation. Recognizing my limitations, I realized that I could only rely on my own knowledge in the field of computers. There was a desire to go beyond the comfort zone and engage in activities unrelated to my knowledge base in the hope that the distance would remove suspicion. I came up with a complex and hard-to-track scheme using a web account that used servers located in another country. Creating a website was a necessary part of the process, although it lacked any creative elements. It took several weeks to create an account and finalize the rest of the details. In the meantime, I devoted all my efforts to improving my acting abilities. Sighing heavily, I said, "Darling, your absence has made me think about the state of our relationship." Amy and I were lying side by side in bed, and she was muttering softly. "Oh," suddenly she spoke, expressing her thoughts about the possibility of having a child. I was interested in this, and I listened attentively as she continued, offering to start trying not immediately but in a few months. When Amy's hand gently stroked my chest, she raised her head and met my gaze. There was excitement in her eyes. She talked about her desire to touch on the topic of starting a family but at the same time doubted our readiness. In response, I put on a perfect smile full of love and deceit. "I think I'm ready," I replied calmly, assuring her that she was everything I hoped for. Gently running my hand over her arm, I kept the appearance of affection. I gently hugged Amy's elbow, expressing my appreciation. "You were incredibly open and loving, and I sincerely believe that you are wholeheartedly devoted to our relationship," I said warmly. Amy tilted her head slightly, apparently embarrassed, in response to the praise. Continuing the conversation, I suggested delving into this idea, giving myself time to assess how we really feel and make sure that this is the right choice for both of us. "Perhaps a month or 2 of discussions will be enough," I suggested. At that moment, Amy leaned forward and kissed me, confirming the pleasure of our joint action. When we discussed the possibility of having a baby, my ultimate goal was for her to make an informed decision. It was important for her to understand what impact this choice would have on her career, our relationship, and the opportunity to go on vacation together in the future. Now that my website was fully ready, the moment came when it was necessary to decide whether to continue implementing my plan. I decided to check Amy's email again to find out if her connection with Rob is still there or if she is weakened amid the discussion about the birth of a child. I had to be patient while I waited for Amy to fall asleep. Carefully opening the laptop, I logged into her work network and went to the inbox folder. To my relief, nothing out of the ordinary appeared. No letters from Rob. But I started the search, and to my surprise, the words of my wife looked at me. She wrote, "Baby, you know we're probably going to start trying to conceive soon. As soon as I stop taking the pills, we will have to be careful during my ovulation phase. But don't worry, dear, I will use a basal thermometer to track the egg release so we won't miss our chance. Amy wrote. Rob responded by suggesting the use of contraceptives. Operation Revenge has been launched on a romantic Friday evening. Amy and I enjoyed a delicious dinner at her favorite restaurant. While waiting for coffee, I gently took her hand and expressed my desire, saying, "I think it's time for us to do this." I nodded, conveying the deep meaning of my words. Amy's face lit up with excitement, and she swallowed hard. She held out her free hand to me and said, "I really want a baby." "Thank you, I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, my dear," I replied affectionately. We agreed that she would stop taking the pills as soon as the next cycle begins. It is possible that she could become fertile within a month. She didn't know yet that on Monday morning she would face unforeseen troubles in the form of intruders or hackers trying to create a formidable appearance on my website. I designed the first page with a tasteful image of Amy. Sex classes at the same time, her face was intentionally blurred, which gave a sense of mystery. I experimented with various options, but one of them appealed to me: a real wife engaged in pleasant games with a lover who is not her spouse. To bring the cheating wife to justice was my favorite phrase. Reflecting on it, I could not help thinking that it was somewhat absurd, but still, my main task was to make sure that Amy would receive this message. Using a technique known as email substitution, I used a fake address of one of her business contacts to immediately attract her attention. The words "I know about you and Rob" were written in the subject of the letter. In order to remain anonymous and avoid possible checks by law enforcement agencies, I sent a message through a server that provided a certain level of protection. Saturday was approaching, and I was looking forward to its end. Being away from home, I felt relieved. The length of the wait gave me the opportunity to mentally prepare myself, hoping that my performance would not just be great. Initially, my plan had scenarios with tearful pleas for forgiveness, but I decided to abandon these options. When I pulled up to our house, Amy's car was parked in the garage with the headlights on, which indicated her presence. "Hello, dear," I called, but got no answer. When I entered the house, I saw Amy in the kitchen. Next to her was an open bottle of wine, already half empty. "Bingo," she started early. "How was your day?" I asked. Amy shook her head, clearly upset. I took on the role of a supportive husband, ready to provide understanding. "Oh, baby, what happened?" I sympathized, putting my arm around Amy's shoulders. "Turn around and let me massage your neck," I suggested, trying to calm her suffering. As I gently massaged her shoulders, my main motive remained clear: I wanted intimacy while she was vulnerable. Amy made an attempt to pull away, but I didn't want to let her get away so easily. "Come on, baby, this will help you distract yourself," I insisted, pulling her back to me. Bending down, I kissed her neck, hoping to distract her with thoughts of creating a family together. My words seemed to strike her like lightning, and she was visibly stunned. Amy didn't seem to understand the true nature of what was happening. "Yes, baby, let's get away from your problems," I whispered seductively. Feeling hungry, I asked, "Are you hungry?" I continued to eat my cheese sandwich, reflecting that my message had not been received. Maybe Amy really had a hard day at work. To make sure of this, I had to proceed to the next stage of Operation Revenge. We went to bed together side by side, even though I knew the truth about her cheating. In the letter sent on Tuesday, I gave clearer instructions, specifying my email address and the email addresses of her parents. I didn't want my self-confidence to cloud my thoughts, as it was very important for Amy to believe that she would be able to get out unharmed. My goal was to prolong her suffering, to prolong the pain she caused me. Inflicting maximum pain was the goal of revenge. I knew her heart would beat when she opened the letter. Will she confess to me? Should she pay? If she pays, they will demand even more. But if she decides not to pay, as a result, she found herself in a state of uncertainty, doubting the correctness of her actions. I visited the site several times during the day, eagerly awaiting a response. Finally, at 3:10 p.m., I found out that she had decided to pay $500 to delete her photos. I imagined her agonizing all day over making a decision, thinking about what choice she was facing. Wonderful, I thought to myself. It's really amazing that my plan unfolded exactly as I expected. One of the most pleasant moments of the implementation of the plan is watching the implementation of the plan. Despite the fact that revenge remains the goal, the planning and implementation process unfolds along its own unique trajectory. Tuesday night was different from the previous evening when Amy came home. I carefully watched her behavior, trying to assess her mood. Meeting her at the threshold, I hugged her tightly and kissed her passionately, filled with a mixture of joy and tension. Her happiness was palpable, albeit with a tinge of forced enthusiasm. In the end, she paid the required amount, but there was uncertainty that the blackmailers would fulfill their part of the deal. Amy, as a person, has wonderful qualities. She has intelligence, charisma, and a certain attractiveness that fascinates others. Amy is not only a fascinating conversationalist but also the owner of intriguing opinions that create fascinating conversations. While cooking dinner together, we indulged in playful flirtation, playfully snatching pieces of food from each other and plunging into the role of passionate lovers. Amy expressed gratitude that her former sour mood was dispelled, and the bright transformation was noticeable. This is the essence of a full life, I thought to myself. Later, we were lying in bed next to each other, deep in conversation about our plans to start a family. Since the pill cycle ended in a few days, she could be fertile within 2 to 3 weeks. "Can't wait," Amy said, her love for me overflowing her heart. But at that moment, my mind couldn't help but recall Amy's previous betrayal and the familiar context in which it happened. When we were considering the idea of having a child in our lives, the question did not leave me, do I really need to take revenge? Reflecting on this question during my daily run, I was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions of anger and resentment. Should I turn the other cheek and let her suffer, or would the more drastic solution be to divorce her and leave? The answer that emerged from the depths of my being struck me. It was a desire to hurt her, humiliate her. I had no intention of making her a truly faithful wife and mother. On the contrary, I longed to destroy her life so that she would haunt me until my last breath. Moreover, I wanted her to never find out about my involvement in her death, in order for her to always feel the weight of her actions and consider me an innocent victim. In a moment of introspection, I doubted my own identity. I resolutely reminded myself, I am a man. I repeated it out loud, reinforcing my desire for revenge. A desire stirred in me to hurt someone, to engage in a physical fight, and leave an indelible mark. With a painful groan, I forcefully closed the car door and started the engine. Amy's downfall was inevitable. Wednesday passed, then Thursday, but there were no immediate consequences. I carefully prepared everything for Friday, an email that was supposed to lead to chaos. The weekend was ahead, and we would have 2 whole days to enjoy the aftermath of the storm that I was going to arrange. The demand was unequivocal, $10,000. If she could still hide $500 somehow, then it would be problematic to collect such a large sum quickly and in one fell swoop. The payment was due before noon on Monday, but the question remained, where else could Amy find the money? I wanted to force her to tell me the truth. "Oh, Jack, I'm an ungrateful soul who doesn't deserve you," I imagined Amy's confession. I lied and cheated. I'm worthless. Indeed, her guilt was undeniable. But I did not expect that our conversation would take such a turn. At 11 a.m., her office number flashed on the caller ID, signaling an incoming call from Amy. I'd been waiting for this moment. I was preparing for it, both for the better and for the worse. Suppressing the urge to send her call to voicemail, I took a deep breath and answered, "Hey, baby, what's going on?" The seriousness in her voice immediately alarmed me. "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" I asked anxiously, feeling clearly uneasy. There was a pause while she tried to find the right words. I thought I heard faint sobs. "Please," she finally managed to say. Without delay, she asked, "I'll meet you at home as soon as you can." Instead of rushing home right away, I decided to drive around the city for another 10 minutes, turning on music to calm my nerves. When I drove up to the house, she was already waiting for me at the door, but she looked visibly upset. With concern on my face, I reached out to hug her, but she held me back, keeping me at a distance. Tears were streaming down her face, her hands were shaking with fear. Despite the storm of emotions raging in me, I managed to find peace. In front of me stood my wife, my beloved, ready to confess her infidelity, the presence of compromising photos with another man, and subsequent blackmail. Although rage was bubbling in my veins, I remained calm at that critical moment. Images flashed through my mind of my hands on her neck, demanding the return of the stolen years. "Give me back my life, you liar," I growled silently. But instead of succumbing to anger, I reached out and took her trembling hands firmly. In a soothing tone, I said, "Whatever it is, know that I love you." At these words, she almost lost her balance and rushed into the bedroom. Being alone in the kitchen, I decided to collect my thoughts and calm down. After filling a glass with water, I headed to the bedroom where Amy was lying face down on the bed, her back rising and falling with each heavy breath. Sitting down next to her, I gently put my hand on her back and offered her water. She shook her head, refusing the gesture. At that moment, I made a conscious decision to remain calm and silent, allowing Amy to lead the conversation. Raising my hand in recognition of her emotions, I silently expressed my understanding. She broke the silence by declaring herself a terrible person. Putting her hand on mine, I tried to comfort and calm her. With a slight shake of my head, I showed her that she was actually a wonderful person. It was obvious that she needed a hint to take her away from this negative way of thinking. "Well, why do you say that?" I asked, genuinely perplexed about her statement. Amy started to explain, her voice trembling. "There are my photos with someone else, with someone who isn't you." My eyes widened in surprise. "Photos?" I repeated, not believing it. She bowed her head, acknowledging that she had only discovered it a couple of days ago. Despite the fact that I have already learned to play, I could not hide my sincere shock. "Amy, who is in these photos?" I asked, hoping for a straight answer. But she only burst into even more tears. At that moment, I dropped the mask of concern and replaced it with a cold detachment. I have always believed that man reaps what he sows. Leaving the room, I went to the kitchen table where I was sitting alone, sipping from a glass of single malt whiskey. A few minutes later, I heard Amy come into the kitchen. Amy carefully sat down at the kitchen table across from me. "You'll never forgive me," she murmured with a hint of resignation. I snorted in disbelief. "After all your promises," I replied. Her next question caught me off guard. "Do you want me to leave?" I felt anger boiling inside me, but I managed to contain it. "No," I said sharply. "I want you to explain to me why. I want you to tell me why you lied to me. I want you to tell me what I did wrong." It was painful for me to see how she was going through such grief, how she confessed her shame through sobs full of tears. Burying her head in her hands, she expressed her remorse. It was only at my insistence that she finally called his name. And then it hit me like a hammer. He was married. In those fleeting moments, a sudden clarity came over me, allowing me to deeply understand the motives of Amy's betrayal, perhaps even more than she herself understood. At heart, she was an actress, driven by an insatiable need to perform. Juggling affairs and maintaining the appearance of a successful marriage presented an insurmountable acting task for her. It was as if she longed to embody the role of both adult toys and a faithful wife, skillfully playing the roles of an extraordinary mistress and an exceptional spouse. I realized that even now, in the midst of our turmoil, she continues to play, imagining a future in which she will smoothly transition into the role of the ideal mother. In the film Attack on the Side, yes, she was still playing. Despite the fact that Amy clung to a glimmer of hope that she could play an Oscar-worthy role and convince me to stay, it dawned on me that she hadn't thought about the possible consequences of such a dangerous game. She kept talking, alternately praising my virtues and expressing remorse for the pain she had caused me. I watched all this, realizing that conflicting emotions were bubbling up in her. There was no denying that she loved me. But like Adam and Eve who succumbed to temptation, she stumbled in the realm of sin. Just as Eve ate the forbidden apple, the knowledge contained in it consumed her. I had no doubt that Amy was gradually immersed in the novel. At first, driven by friendly feelings and playful flirtation, and then spurred on by her own desire to escape from the clutches of grief. Reflecting on the circumstances that led Amy to adultery, I couldn't help but feel the full weight of her unspoken fears about our common future and the prospect of starting a family. Gradually, she reached out to him. At first, just for contact, then in search of more, and eventually entangled in a web of deception and role-playing games. At the same time, Amy did not notice that the role she was playing was gradually absorbing her. This realization struck me as the latest update, as a harsh recognition of her vulnerability. At that moment, I was overcome by a feeling of deep kinship that goes beyond the relationship of husband and wife or just lovers. We were two people caught in an endless cycle, aware of our knowledge but lacking the wisdom to understand its complexities. We had the determination to resist our desires, but lacked the strength to win. It was a common struggle that connected us, not as romantic partners, but as people trying to figure out the intricacies of their own desires and limitations. "Why did you decide to disclose this information right now?" I asked. It was about photographs, but I felt that she did not dare to tell me more about it. "What is depicted in these photos?" I asked. She replied, "They depict me," and fell silent. It became clear that she started by mentioning the pictures but did not disclose the context. When I realized what these photos were, my anger became obvious. The idea that someone captured explicit actions in pictures with my loved one could infuriate anyone. "Have you lost your mind?" I snapped. "What made you think about such a vile act?" This situation represented the culmination of a nightmare. In her idealized view, she said that it was his idea and that the photos were a source of satisfaction for him. From their email correspondence, I already understood that the goal was aimed at something else. "Does he use these photos as leverage on you?" Amy shook her head reluctantly, voicing her truth. "I'm being blackmailed," she confessed. "I received an email with threats in which I was invited to visit a certain site. There I saw images of myself, although my face was not fully visible. Well, that is my photos. The blackmailers demanded payment, otherwise, they will put the contents in the public domain. The blackmailers had addresses from my contact list. His face was clearly visible on the compromising pictures, which means that they will eventually be seen by his wife, our colleagues, and everyone with whom we work." Talking about what happened, Amy mentioned that he almost had a heart attack when he found out about it. He expressed fears that his marriage would break up, and he would lose everything he holds dear. I couldn't help but snort in disbelief. "Are you saying these photos were digital?" I asked with obvious bewilderment. Amy confirmed this with a wave of her hand. "You stupid man," I muttered, tearing myself away from my words. "Don't you understand?" I said with emphasis. "Digital files can be easily found. Your email is stored on servers." I went on to explain the potential risks. An experienced hacker with access to your network can easily find image files there. There was a moment of silence while we both pondered the question. "If it's not your boyfriend," I pronounced the word with contempt, "then anyone could have found out the password or hacked it. Maybe someone accidentally left the laptop unattended or lost a piece of paper with a password written on it." I assumed that if it really was a hacker, then he could conduct a targeted search for files with images and eventually access her account. "Did they threaten him?" I asked. "No," she replied, not understanding the situation. "Who knows, but he sent you these photos, right?" I realized that these photos were most likely attached to his email, which allowed someone to hack his account. Amy's question sounded like a half-question, half-malice. What should I do? Feeling disappointed by the lack of information, I began to ask her for details. She explained that the blackmailers demanded $500 in exchange for removing her photos from their website. $500? I asked mockingly, considering this amount incredible. "Are you kidding me? And what is the name of this site?" I expressed my irritation, having decided to sort out the situation. I quickly went to my computer and tried to go to the site indicated by her. At the same time, I did a Google search to get more information. To my disappointment, both attempts failed to produce any results. It seems that there is no website under this name. I agreed with Amy's initial statement. In search of further clarification, I asked, "Did they provide you with a URL, or was there a link in the email that you can go to?" Amy nodded, suggesting that it was probably an assumed name. Trying to get more information, I asked her to restore the email. Amy took her laptop out of her briefcase, put it on the table, and logged into her work mailbox. Sensing the potential danger of sending the letter directly, she hesitated. No forwarding can convert the link to plain text, she explained, leaning over her desk. I opened a new letter, addressed it to myself, and carefully copied the threatening letter, including the link, into a new message. After sending the letter, I returned to my desk and waited for his arrival. Soon after, a letter arrived, and I opened it immediately. Amy was standing behind me, and we were both looking at the screen when the words "blackmailed wives" appeared on the screen. I looked back at her, forcing her to instinctively step back. Keeping the appearance of calm, I pretended to read the text carefully. "Who are these idiots?" I exclaimed, curious about the payment. "Have you already paid them?" Amy confessed, "Yes, I paid them $500. "In what way?" I asked. She replied, "I transferred the money to my Visa card." Deciding to conduct further investigation, I carefully studied the site. Eventually, I turned to Amy and said, "Your picture isn't here. They said they would delete it as soon as you paid." I looked at her intently. "Please tell me why you're confessing. Don't make me pull it out of you," I begged, hoping for an honest answer. In the morning, Amy looked away and finally spoke, then turned to me again. "They're threatening me again. If I don't pay $10,000 by Monday, they intend to distribute the photos to everyone," she said, shocked. I asked, "Is that true?" Amy nodded, feeling overwhelmed. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor, overcome with despair. "I've ruined everything," she cried. "I can't believe this is happening." My heart sank when I saw her suffering. I said in a soft tone, "Do you know what I'm going to do?" After a short pause, I continued, "No. I'm going to support you. Together, we will find a way to deal with this." Amy was crying, looking for advice. "What are your thoughts?" I asked, disappointment in my tone. "You reap what you sow, baby," I added gloomily. "All good things come to an end sometime." Wanting to assess her determination, I asked, "Aren't you thinking of paying them?" Stunned, she confessed, "I do not know what to do. I feel like I've lost you. What should I do?" The gravity of the situation fell on us when Friday afternoon turned into evening. Exhausted, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I saw Amy in the room, staring intently at the computer screen. "I can't bring myself to pay," she said. I grunted in response, but did not express my thoughts. "I foresaw it," I replied stoically. $10,000 is a significant amount that can be spent without any guarantees. "Maybe they're bluffing," she reasoned. Amy then considered an alternative approach, saying, "If I revealed the photos to everyone I know, it would be equivalent to them being sent at all." Stunned by the situation, I expressed my disbelief. "Amy, I can't believe you let this happen. We had plans to start a family. I do not know if I will ever recover from this." On Monday morning, the last phase of Operation Revenge began. An email arrived containing all the photos and the selection of the most destructive conversations. Without hesitation, I began to act. I quickly sent an email to all the contacts on Amy's list, which included her family, friends, and business partners. I didn't even wait until noon before taking action. While I was packing up my things and loading them into the car, someone might have assumed that it would be quite pleasant to stay to observe the consequences and enjoy the feeling of compassion. But watching Amy struggle with the consequences would only bring me sadness. It became clear that we can no longer maintain the appearance that the outside world is just an illusion. It's time to leave. Following this, Amy's life collapsed. She was forced to quit her job after facing both professional and public humiliation. When Amy faced the consequences of her act, some people mocked and turned away from her, but many showed amazing empathy. Love is really a complicated thing. Despite our sincere love for each other, Amy's inability to control herself led to the fact that our marriage became unstable. There was a divorce process going on, and I couldn't help thinking that she might arrange a pregnancy to lure me into a trap. In the end, the divorce was finalized, and the division of property turned out to be a fairly simple matter. We sold our shared apartment and divided the proceeds equally. Amy, as before, repeated that as long as she had me, nothing else mattered. But the truth is, she couldn't have me. However, after the divorce, we managed to maintain a certain level of communication. As for her lover, his experience was even more difficult. His wife did not want to forgive him, and the humiliation that he had brought on himself professionally sought to extract all possible benefits from their divorce. I felt no sympathy for him when he faced the consequences of his actions. As for Amy and me, our relationship started to deteriorate when I met the woman I eventually married. It was difficult for both of us to keep in touch, especially when my happiness was firmly connected with my new spouse. On the day of the wedding, Amy turned to me with a note in which she confessed that she still loves me. But we haven't talked for several years, and frankly, I don't care about her current circumstances. Now I am focused on Pilar, my wife, with whom we are raising 2 children together, 3 and 5 years old. Now we are working on expanding our family, hoping for the appearance of a 3rd child. My wife Pilar is fully aware of my past with Amy. She knows every minute detail of what happened between us. We have come to a mutual understanding that infidelity in our relationship is unacceptable. If one of us betrays the other, there will be consequences. I am telling this to emphasize the importance of maintaining perspective in the quest for revenge. It is very important not to let the desire for revenge consume all your thoughts and actions. In my case, the desire to take revenge on Amy eventually made me a stronger person and, as I believe, a better person. I plunged into the depths of pain and came out into the light. I experienced a fiery anger igniting in my soul. More than 5 years after I last saw Amy, her life has changed a lot, as has she. For about a year, she lived with a not very nice man who often beat her, as my friends told me. Amy has no front teeth. Apparently, these are the consequences of her partner's cruelty. I also found out that she is unhappy with him and, in principle, dissatisfied with her life. Working as a nurse in a psychiatric hospital, she earns much less than ever. To all this horror, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. The tumor turned out to be malignant. Karma has overtaken poor and deceitful Amy, and I'm happy when I hold my precious little girls in my arms. I know the all-encompassing beauty of unconditional love. Story 2. Let me introduce myself, Bonnie Brown, formerly known as Bonnie Betsy Lowry. When I was growing up, my parents had high hopes for my future. After all, I married Benjamin Brown, and I hope that my new surname will give me elegance and poise. But anyway, life took an unexpected turn when I turned 38. Someone might object that this is still a relatively young age, but I couldn't help feeling disappointed. Our society seems to place an excessive emphasis on youth, which made me doubt the value of hard work, dedication to study, and achieving academic success. Despite the fact that I studied hard and got decent grades in college, now I doubt that I will be able to make a full-fledged career. I married a wonderful man, created a family, and at the moment when it seems that life is getting better, the world turns its attention to someone younger. This was prompted not by any specific case, but rather by a gradual understanding that all the attention in the office goes to young interns. Men used to flirt with me, and although I never let them overstep the boundaries, it was nice. I felt attractive and desirable. But one day, I noticed that the attention I once received was gone. Life turned into a series of responsibilities at work. High hopes were pinned on me, and my children counted on me to wake them up, dress them, and feed them. In the evenings, I needed help with homework. Household chores required attention, laundry, gardening, paying bills. Countless other tasks awaited me every day. Fortunately, my husband was always ready to help. He willingly coped with piles of laundry, prepared food for my late arrivals, took care of the lawn, helped the children with their studies. But as a wife and mother, the burden of responsibility lay on my shoulders. I carried the weight of the world on me, feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. Remembering those times, it can be assumed that I had depression, although I can't say for sure. I was burdened with a lot of obligations, getting into a monotonous routine that seemed constant. Looking back, I doubt my sanity at the time. If the opportunity presented itself, I would sacrifice everything, even my soul, to survive that life for at least one day. But I can't offer my soul since I've already lost it. In fact, I threw it away along with everything I had that was really valuable. On Wednesday, March 5th, I received an invitation to the director's office. The following Monday, the 17th, I was supposed to go to New York for a week-long training, an analog of the management school in my company. The recognition of the company meant that a promising promotion was waiting for me, which meant progress in my career. I eagerly shared the news with my family, expecting them to get tired of my constant conversations about the upcoming trip, but their enthusiasm was not inferior to mine. They wholeheartedly supported and encouraged me. The children inundated me with numerous questions, and my husband Ben constantly talked about my capabilities. Their unwavering faith in me strengthened my self-confidence. With Ben's support, I went to the store, armed with his reliable credit card, in search of several new costumes suitable for my new role. While preparing for the evening chat, I realized that I needed to update my wardrobe. After all, the evening would be attended by important people from all over the country, and it was important for me to make an indelible impression. I wanted them to recognize me as their own so that they would remember me. I was determined to leave my mark. When Sunday came, I gave my husband a quick kiss, hugged the kids, and boarded the shuttle heading to the airport. The coming week has completely engulfed my thoughts. When I was sitting on the plane, it suddenly dawned on me that I hurried away without taking enough time to say goodbye to my family. I reassured myself that they would understand my haste. During my stay at the hotel where classes were also held, I settled in a room, refreshed myself, and began to get acquainted with the situation. Not knowing anyone present, I couldn't help but overhear a few conversations about the upcoming class. Taking the initiative, I introduced myself to some of them, and eventually, we had dinner together. It was during this dinner that I was introduced to Janet, Donna, and Jim. To my surprise, they offered me a drink with them after dinner, and I agreed without hesitation. After all, this week was supposed to be a break from the usual routine. There was even a dance floor in the hotel, although the music was pre-recorded. Nevertheless, Jim took turns dancing with each of us. I was very pleased to be independent and dance with a new partner. I reassured myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong because Jim had danced with other women. We were in a public place, so there's nothing wrong with that, right? As the night went on and we drank a little, the dancing became more intimate. In the end, I felt Jim snuggle up to me. I must admit that it gave me a certain pleasure and made me feel younger, but it was already beyond the bounds of what was allowed. Overwhelmed with guilt, I decided to justify myself and end the evening. I realized that I hadn't called home to announce my safe arrival until I was about to go to bed. Unfortunately, it was too late to call at that moment. The classes I attended were quite interesting, and I tried very hard. In the evenings, we would gather at the bar to have a drink. I ended up dancing with a few men, but it seems like I spent most of my time with Jim. Gradually, I felt his presence snuggling closer to him, and oddly enough, I liked it. I felt young again and didn't see anything wrong with it because we were in a public place, and nothing bad was supposed to happen. But trouble happened on Wednesday evening. We were getting too close, and I realized that I was spending a significant part of my time dancing with Jim. He hugged me tightly, and I couldn't help but notice his physical reaction, which caused me to feel very much in love. Feeling depressed, I went to the ladies' room to freshen up and solve the problem with underwear. When I returned, we managed to get a table, and then everything developed according to a predictable scenario. Jim stubbornly continued to give me his attention, and I willingly indulged in pleasure. In the end, I stayed the night in his room and entered into a passionate relationship with a man I barely knew. Although, according to social norms, I should have been ashamed, but oddly enough, there was not a drop of guilt in me. Jim was a temporary consolation for me, a distraction from problems. His smiles, touches, and kisses on the neck fueled my desires. But on reflection, I realized that he did not offer anything that my own husband could not give. There was no romance in his kisses, no reassuring confidence in his voice. In the end, all Jim gave was 2 nights of unrestrained passion and a hurried meeting when he was leaving. When I boarded the plane and returned to the life I had built without Jim distracting my attention, reality finally became reality. I was faced with the harsh truth. I betrayed my husband, the only man I truly loved, by having an affair with a stranger. It was a painful betrayal of the trust and commitment we shared. I committed my deeds without remorse, and even worse, brazenly continued them in the presence of other people. It was obvious that everyone around me was aware of what was happening. It was impossible not to notice it. The women around me were not envious or indignant, on the contrary, they severely condemned me. Very little time passed, and my name became the subject of scandal in all offices of the country. The consequences of my behavior were bound to reach my own workplace. I couldn't help but worry about how I would manage to hide this from Ben, my husband. Although he may not have been intimately acquainted with my colleagues, he attended our Christmas parties and sometimes had gatherings in the backyard. It was only a matter of time before someone somewhere found out the truth about my actions. When I thought about the possible consequences of my mistakes, I was overwhelmed by a wave of panic. And what if someone reveals our connection? What will I do in this case? The realization that I could have put my health at risk also struck me. Naively relying only on pills, I didn't even think that during passionate meetings with Jim, you can use more reliable protection. This fact made me feel fear and apprehension until the end of the flight. It seemed to me that my fate was sealed and everything that was dear to me, my life, my husband, my children, and my home, would be under threat. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget about the events of that week. Besides, I didn't even have Jim's mobile phone number. He was just a nameless figure, an escape from the desires of young interns in the office. I got into a situation where I was looking for temporary pleasure and escape from responsibility. It was hard to deny that my actions could be regarded as promiscuity. After all, what other conclusion could be drawn? I didn't have a chance to contact him and warn him about the need to be careful, as I wasn't going to get in touch with him again after leaving. From that moment on, I had the feeling that I was walking towards an inevitable fate, and I had no choice but to confront it and accept its consequences. The idea occurred to me to confess everything to Ben, throw myself at his mercy. But at the same time, I was afraid that he would not be able to forgive me. I knew that if the roles were reversed, it would be difficult for me to find forgiveness in myself. On the plane, which brought me closer to the impending reckoning, I reflected that Ben would most likely want intimacy when I returned home. Reflecting on the fact that I had been away for almost a whole week, I experienced conflicting emotions. I couldn't put off meeting Ben any longer without hurting him. However, the thought did not leave me that during my absence, I could have been infected with something. If I really got infected with something and unwittingly passed it on to Ben, it would undoubtedly undermine his trust in me. In his eyes, I would be worse than a simple girl. The anxiety became too strong, and it even occurred to me that a successful heart attack is a means of getting rid of the impending consequences. Unfortunately, luck was not on my side. With every kilometer, the road home became more and more unbearable. It seemed that I was voluntarily leading myself to an inevitable execution from which there was no escape. Finally, I drove up to the front door, desperately hoping that it would still mean the warmth of our house, and was greeted by familiar shouts, "Mom is home." Enthusiastic children ran into the room, hugging me tightly. My husband also showered me with a flurry of affectionate kisses. Their smiles were infectious, and they were all looking forward to telling me how I spent my time, what I saw, what I did, how it was. The weight of guilt threatened to engulf me. How can I share the truth about my actions with them? Passing from child to child, I saw only firm love in their eyes. My husband's face radiated joy at my return. It seemed that everyone was just eager to see me, and I was overwhelmed by an outpouring of unconditional love from all sides. Overcome by this feeling, I couldn't help thinking that I didn't deserve any of this. Deep down, I knew I had betrayed them all. Gathering all my strength, I talked about the course with a brave face, describing the dishes, conveying the essence of the sights and sounds of the city. At the same time, I carefully omitted the truth about the betrayal, about how shamelessly I behaved in front of everyone, about the betrayal that I committed against them all. From that evening, I was seized with a feeling of panic. I was afraid that my secret would be revealed. Ben, not yet aware of my misdeeds, craved intimacy. Unable to refuse him so as not to arouse suspicion, I gave myself up to him in the very bed that we had shared since our wedding day. Deep down, I tried to convince myself that Jim wasn't a bad person, he was just looking for connections with married people like me. But the admission that I had become another statistic, a married woman mired in infidelity, was a heavy blow. Trying to calm my conscience, I convinced myself that Jim most likely would not have any possible consequences. I decided to become the best and most loving wife imaginable, showering Ben with affection and devotion. My determination was based on the belief that if Ben found out about my sin, his love would overcome anger and pain, and he would forgive me. But in my optimism, I overlooked one important detail. 4 months have passed since the incident, and I began to think that I had managed to escape. I swore to myself that I would never repeat such a betrayal, promised not to jeopardize the love and trust of Ben and our children anymore. Returning home, I was overwhelmed with happiness, eagerly set about preparing dinner for my beloved family. There was an eerie silence in the house. There were no familiar sounds and noisy activities to which I had already managed to get used. Instead, I saw Ben sitting alone in an armchair with a depressed mood, his head bowed low and tears streaming down his cheeks. Worried, I went up to him, asked him what had happened, and if he was all right. Sighing heavily, he began to speak. I received a letter at work today, he said with sadness in his voice. It looks like you upset someone in your office, perhaps said something wrong or somehow offended. Whatever it is, they treat you with great contempt. Confused and stunned, I exclaimed, but what have I done? I've always tried to get along with everyone. His answer was depressingly simple. My world collapsed when I received an unexpected letter with photos taken on a mobile phone during your training. In those days when you were away, the pictures captured a pleasant pastime, and one man seemed to enjoy every moment. When my husband's words reached me, I desperately wanted to deny everything, to express my unconditional love for him and only for him. I wanted to convince him that no one else could take a place in my heart. But at that moment, it was as if I was paralyzed. My mind turned off. I lost the power of speech and plunged into empty contemplation. Maybe this is the beginning of the end, a signal for the destruction of our once unbreakable bond. Painful thoughts raced through my head that my actions and that ill-fated week of recklessness could cost me everything I valued. Can my life as I knew it be irrevocably destroyed? The evidence was indisputable. He had a collection of photographs on which a devastating portrait of my behavior was painted. Although the pictures didn't capture intimate moments in the bedroom, they revealed a side of me that I didn't remember. The undeniable truth looked at me through these photos. I saw myself dancing too close with Jim, exchanging kisses on the dance floor and at our table. Jim's hands were brazenly on my back, and the other seemed to penetrate my blouse. There was even a photo of Jim's hand resting on my leg, dangerously climbing under my skirt as we sat together at the table. Feeling the full weight of my actions, I realized that my fate was sealed. There was no other way out but to confess everything and face the consequences. Face to face with a heavy heart, I plucked up the courage and confessed everything, desperately begging for forgiveness. Tears were streaming down my face when I said the words, "Ben, I'm sorry." I wanted him to understand the severity of my remorse. Love filled my voice as I continued. I know that this is a one-time mistake, unlike anything I've ever done before, and it will never happen again. Despair sounded in my words, and I began to calm him down. Darling, I love you more than words can express. Our life together means everything to me. Please, I'm begging you, give me a second chance. I promise you won't regret it. I will do everything in my power to make you forget about the stupidity to which I succumbed. Trust me, you won't regret it. I promise from the bottom of my heart. In the face of obvious betrayal, my amazing husband demonstrated an extraordinary act of love and forgiveness. He decided not to go into details, protecting himself from the painful truth. Instead, he sat absorbed in grief, and his spirit was fading inside. During these endless hours of heartache, I held him close, wiping away tears and assuring him of my unwavering love. I solemnly vowed to become his refuge, to ease his pain, and never to cause him such suffering again. Determined, I fully committed myself to fulfilling this promise. But as I said, there was one important detail that I forgot to tell you about. I didn't realize that a broken human heart is a wound that doesn't always heal. The man who once loved me selflessly, whose mission was to bring joy into my life, turned out to be irreparably broken. His once radiant smile faded, and his ringing laugh became a distant memory. Although we sometimes made love, it seemed that thoughts were spinning in his head that I had someone else. I devoted myself to healing his wounded soul, but my efforts were insufficient. Over time, our children grew up, found jobs, and moved away. We continued to sleep in the same bed, but melancholy reigned in our house. I began to realize that it wasn't just intimacy with another man that ruined my life. In fact, my gentle and caring husband entrusted me with everything that determined his self-esteem. By my betrayal, I deprived him of a sense of value, confidence that he is cherished, and that his existence makes sense. Understanding this made me face a difficult choice. I could either free him, giving him the opportunity to restore the person I tore apart by finding love elsewhere, or continue our relationship, making every effort to be an exceptional and devoted wife, even if he would no longer see me through the same loving prism. Realizing the profound impact my departure would have, I understood that my departure would only confirm the depreciation that I had inflicted on my husband by my infidelity. The thought that I would strengthen his sense of his own worthlessness as a man and a husband was unbearable. Therefore, I decided to stay by his side, watching with bitterness how this wonderful person transforms, turning inward. Slowly but surely, the living spirit I married was fading away, leaving behind only a shadow of its former essence. Not knowing how I found out the truth, my children found out about my misdeeds. Ben, of course, never told them the details, taking care of their emotional well-being and mine. The fact that they found out about my betrayal separated us for a long time, and this gap has not healed yet. They witnessed the gradual degradation of my father and understood perfectly well that it was a consequence of my actions. The whole burden of responsibility fell solely on my shoulders, forever changing the dynamics of our family's development. Surprisingly, I have not decided on a divorce, which haunted me during the flight home many years ago. But despite my physical presence, I lost my husband and children as surely and completely as if they had physically left my life. They really left me, although not in the literal sense of the word. As I said, one important detail slipped my mind. I didn't take into account that by breaking a person's heart, you irreversibly change it. The man who once loved me wholeheartedly, who found a purpose in making me happy, turned out to be shattered. Admittedly, he made a brave effort in a desperate attempt to repair the damage done. I opened my soul, and we sought professional advice. My only desire was to witness his happiness again, to make amends for the pain and disappointment I had caused him. But after 6 months of hard work, we made the heartbreaking decision to part ways. I would have fought tirelessly for the rest of my days to comfort him and help him forget, but he had nothing more to give. I took everything from him and casually threw it away. Although Ben was not physically estranged, he was no longer the loving husband I once knew. He was still constantly present in my life, taking part in it almost daily, but the warmth and affection that once defined our relationship had disappeared. He devoted his time and love to our children, and our communication became polite but devoid of the joy that we once shared. The love he once had for me has faded. Betrayal has a huge impact on a man's consciousness. Once his wife seemed to him an extraordinary person, a source of daily celebration, but suddenly he was faced with the harsh reality of her gross mistake, and in his eyes, she turned into an ordinary libertine. After that, I didn't get married anymore and didn't look for companionship on dates. The man I loved remained in my life, albeit at a distance, giving me a sense of comfort that supported me. Time passed, and it seemed that we were gradually healing. It was a difficult 6 months, full of guilt and an atmosphere far from normal life in our house, but the anger dissipated, and tears became less frequent for both of us. I have no doubt that throughout our turbulent life path, he had moments when he was thinking about giving up. His life stubbornly refused to part with our relationship, and I vowed to do the same. I was ready to apologize for the rest of my days, seeking atonement for the pain I had caused, but there came a turning point in the therapist's office when Ben turned to me with indescribable sadness on his face and uttered words that struck me to the core. He acknowledged my mistakes but asked me to stop apologizing. He expressed his desire that we move forward and find happiness again. At that moment, it seemed to me that this was the end, and these words to live unechoed in my mind. In fear and anticipation, I was sure that now he would utter words that would destroy our marriage, a terrible mention of divorce. But what he said next surprised me. Through tearful eyes, he confessed to me his boundless love, acknowledged the deep pain caused by my actions and strong anger at another man, but despite all this, he really wanted the woman he married to come back into his life. He longed to share our bed again, to see my smile and hear my laughter. He imagined how we would grow old together and regain the lost happiness. As the conversation continued, there were tears in the eyes of both of us. We hugged, kissed, expressed gratitude to each other. When he began to speak, fear gripped my heart, and I clung to him tightly, not knowing what his words would lead to. But as his tender words unfolded, I clung to him even more, fearing that it might all be too good to be true. perhaps the therapist realized that there was a breakthrough and suggested that we go home and make love. It was an unconventional recipe, but the most therapeutic I've ever received, and I accepted it with all sincerity. It took about 2 more years for the wounds from my betrayal to fully heal and become a distant memory. There were moments when I saw the remnants of pain in Ben's eyes, when unspoken thoughts arose between us. In such cases, words were not needed. I approached him, stopped next to him, or sat down next to him, silently offering my support and understanding. With each hug, I cherished this feeling as if it could be the last, and patiently waited for the day when I would see his smile. Even when I tried to bring joy back into his life, my own eyes often filled with tears, a constant reminder of the pain I had caused him. Even now, the memory of that immense pain haunts me, and I have no doubt that Ben also carries these scars. I caused this incredible man a lot of pain because of something that didn't matter to him at all, and yet he found the strength to forgive me. From that moment on, I vowed to spend the rest of my life as the wife he truly deserves. Every day, I offer prayers of deep gratitude that he gave me a second chance, and I am determined to make the most of this precious opportunity.